Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Hi, I'm Kevin Quinn, your new host for Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Associate Dean of the Social Sciences and Professor of Economics at St. Norbert. I'm really excited to be able to build upon what our previous host, Michael Marsden, has already established with this show. We have a beautiful new set, and we are excited to begin a new era. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Chris Farrell, to discuss timely topics, the economy, and personal finance. Farrell is the economics editor for Marketplace Money, American Public Media's nationally syndicated personal finance program on public radio. An award-winning journalist, Farrell is a regular contributor to Marketplace Morning Report and is the chief economics correspondent for American Public Media's documentary unit, American Radio Works, as well as Minnesota Public Radio. His latest book, The New Frugality, How to Consume Less, Save More, and Live Better, emphasizes the changing way we live to make the most of what we have and promoting moderation for individual financial health. Chris, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, and I'm honored to be the first person on your new set. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. We're really proud of it. Let's start off with the economy today. You recently wrote an article in Business Week critical of claims that the recession ended in 2009. Is the recession over?
Well, the recession is over from an economist's point of view. So, you're an economist, you're looking at gross domestic product, the economy is still growing. Right, and so yes, you would probably, I think when the wise men and women of the National Bureau of Economic Research, this group in Cambridge that gets together, and they're the ones that determine when we went into a downturn and when we came out of it, I still think that they're going to date the end of the recession, sometime the summer of 2009, somewhere in there. But we've been growing really slow, and as you know, we really slowed down a lot this summer. So we are growing, but from the point of view of a person, from the point of view of a family, aren't we still in a recession? 34 months since the start of the Great Recession, the unemployment rate is 9.6%. If you look at our broadest measure of unemployment, which is your official measure, that 9.6%, plus including people that want to be working full-time, say 40 hours a week, but they're only able to get 20 hours a week. That's 16.7% of the population. From the point of view of the average worker, the average family, we're still in a recession.
Well, that's not very good news. How long do you think this is likely to remain the case?
Well, I think it's going to remain the case. Unfortunately, conventional wisdom is that this is going to remain the case for a considerable period of time. And one of the fun things that in my profession is to go against conventional wisdom. But this time, I think conventional wisdom is right. By the way, it is, it's one of those classic instances of the glass is half full, half empty. Not going to make any jokes about on the one hand, on the other hand. Not going to go that way. So we'll go with the glass half full, half empty. The good news is that the economy is expanding, all right? And companies are creating some jobs. So there is some forward momentum. It would be a lot worse if we were still in a downward spiral. What is disappointing is that this is the worst downturn since the 1930s. And typically when you have a bad downturn, the bounce back is really pretty strong. Businesses start rebuilding their inventories because for whatever reason people start shopping again and they realize we got nothing for the shelves. And the stores are calling and they're saying, hey, we need, customers are coming in the store. We need to start selling stuff. This time around that's not really happening. It's just much more slow. It's a much more gradual recovery. It's going to take a long time for the unemployment rate to come down. And it's also going to take a long time for people to start seeing some real wage increases. Because companies don't have to increase worker wages much in this environment.
You talk about the Great Recession in another article you wrote, and you compare it to the Great Depression in some ways. Is 2010 really like 1935?
No, it's not like 1935 at all. I think that one of the important parallels is, and there's obviously a huge debate in this country going on, but I do think that we were on the cusp when Lehman Brothers went under, and that we were on the cusp of a Great Depression. That was a real risk. It could not be dismissed. And so I do think that what Washington did, not just Washington, but also London and Shanghai and Beijing and China. They dusted off their John Maynard Keynes, but they also dusted off their Milton Friedman, because Milton Friedman said, can really blame the Great Depression on the monetary authorities, the Federal Reserve, that they had run a bad monetary policy. And Ben Bernanke, the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, is a scholar of the Great Depression, and I think he basically said, not on my watch. So what we had is flooding the system with money, easy money. You had a bank bailout, ugly, disgusting thing called a bank bailout. But again, dusting off your Milton Friedman, what he was writing about is, in a crisis, you ease a lot, but you also have to shore up the banking system. And then we had a fiscal stimulus. Taken all together, we've gone through one of the ugliest periods of our history, but the net result, I think, has been to prevent a Great Depression.
Well, certainly in the popular press, there's all kinds of critical articles about what the Fed has done, what the government has done. And one of the things that they're complaining about or concerned about is the prospect of inflation, 1970s style inflation, and because we have easy monetary policy and perhaps a number of other things, lots of government spending, et cetera. Are you concerned about inflation?
I'm not that concerned about inflation. And the reason why I'm not concerned about inflation is, first of all, we have essentially price stability now. There's a big debate going on about, are we going to face inflation, a rise in the overall price level? And when we're talking about inflation, it's not just that, the price of your health care goes up, or the price of a car goes up, or it's a little more costly for education. It's the overall price level. So everything's moving up. And because in the jargon, prices are always changing in our economy depending on supply and demand. But inflation depreciates the value of the dollar. You just buy a lot less with your dollar. But we're also talking about deflation, which is an overall drop in the price level. And that scares a lot of people, because when you have a weak economy and you have deflation, what that really means is, if you're a business, you got to cut your price to try and sell some stuff, and you're probably selling less. So then you got to look at your workforce, and you go, I'm not making enough money, so I got to lay off some more workers. And then you got to cut your price some more because you got fewer. So that's what's really scaring people. My own feeling is that we're living through a period of price stability, that the forces of inflation and deflation are balancing each other out. So the real question is, what happens 2-3 years from now? And with all the easing that the Fed has done, are we going to end up with inflation? Because the famous expression by Milton Friedman, I keep going back to Milton Friedman, but a famous expression by Milton Friedman, which is that inflation is too much money chasing too few goods, right? So you just printed too much money. The reason why I'm not concerned about it, we might see a bout of inflation, maybe even a year or two, but there are some offsetting forces. First of all, we live in a global economy. And in a global economy, which you have good manufacturers in China and good manufacturers in India, there's just a lot of price competition out there. It's the Walmart effect writ large. With all that competition, that's a downward pressure on prices. So it helps out. It's an anti-inflation force. The second thing is that all central bankers have gone to the same school. If you look at their age, they've all been shaped by the experience that you mentioned, the 1970s. They don't want to go through it again. So as soon as we get a whiff of inflation, they're going to tighten up very, very quickly. So a bout of inflation, a little bit of an inflation scare, sure. But a real sustained rise in inflation like the 1970s, I don't see it.
I think we want to see neither the inflation nor the fashion of the 1970s.
That's right.
Make a comeback. But yet there are quite a few people.
You might look good in a navy jacket.
I don't know. I don't know if they make them in my size. But one of the concerns that people have about inflation is being translated into buying gold. Yes. Grandma is bringing down the gold to the jewelry store to try to cash in on a price which is somewhere around $1,200 or $1,300 an ounce, which is, I think, below the inflation-adjusted amount that it was at the last high. What are your thoughts about gold as an investment?
I don't think gold is an investment. There's puts me in a certain category because to me gold is a speculation. So you're worried about inflation. Right? And inflation, from the point of view of the long-term saver, inflation is still the big worry. Because what inflation means is that over time, your dollar buys less and less. And what you want to do is have your dollar at least preserve its value over a period of time. So you're a retiree. You're saving, you're putting some money into a savings account today. 30 years from now, you want it to be worth $1 plus some interest. So what I like are things like Treasury inflation protected securities. These are securities sold by the government on the bond market, and it's a hedge against inflation, adjusts to the consumer price index, and there's no credit risk because it's the full faith and credit of the federal government. And it also has a deflation floor that if we have deflation and prices are falling, they're still going to pay you back 100 cents on the dollar. Okay, so I like that. Or for average people, I-bonds. You know, these are savings bonds that have an inflation hedge. Gold to me is a speculation. Because you buy gold today, what you're essentially saying is, a month from now, a year from now, I'm going to be able to sell this gold at a higher price. So gold always makes me nervous. I don't have a problem with the the old-fashioned European perspective, which is the European wealthy have always had like 2% of their assets in gold. That's sort of a very traditional European. That's fine. That doesn't bother me. But if you're really saving for your retirement, if you're saving for your children's college education, you're just sort of saving as a household, and you want to preserve the value of your dollar, I think there's a lot safer ways to do it and a lot less costly ways to do it than speculating in gold.
You're watching Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Joining us is award-winning journalist Chris Farrell, and we're talking about the economy and personal finance. Let's talk a little bit about personal finance.
Okay.
You served as a merchant seaman.
Yes.
For a number of years. What lessons did that teach you about personal finance?
Oh, it taught me a lot of lessons about personal finance. I worked in the engine rooms of one container ship and another were oil tankers. Got to go around the world through the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal, the Persian Gulf. I mean, it was really Europe, off to Asia. So it was a real adventure. So one of the things that I really learned is that when there's a bunch of gray-haired gentlemen sitting around a table who have gone to sea for a long, long time, sea dogs, and they're playing a poker game, don't join the poker game because you're going to walk off that ship with no money, right? And you are going to have to pay off your debt. So that was one lesson that I learned. But the other lesson I learned, I still think that this is one of the most important lessons for anybody. You know, in terms of personal finance, it's having a margin of safety. And having a margin of safety means you know that you can measure it different ways, but basically you have a financial cushion because there's always the unexpected. Now, sometimes the unexpected is a good thing. And you have this financial cushion, you can take advantage of something. But sometimes what happens to you is bad, and then this is a financial cushion that sort of protects you. So as a merchant seaman, you work all the time, you work 7 days a week. There's really not much to spend your money on. You're not in port for very long. And then when I get off ships, I save all my money. And then I'd just go wait tables, work for a professor, all kinds of things, and go back to sea. Took my money, went to London School of Economics. I had it all budgeted out. It was fine. Went with 2 friends and loved the London School of Economics, loved living in London, and the budget worked. However, you mentioned the 1970s. So Carter was president, Blumenthal was Treasury Secretary, and the dollar reached its all-time low against the British pound. And so this budget, 4 years of work, it barely worked out. I managed to make it back to New York, with my degree, and but I didn't have the nice fat cushion that I imagined. So that is what it really taught to me, is to really build into your plans a margin of safety, because you never know when the dollar's going to plunge, or the stock market's going to plunge, or interest rates are going to. You just don't know, so you just want to sort of build yourself a margin of safety. It's like remodeling a home. Have you done this, remodel a home?
Yes, unfortunately, I have.
So they always say, that's what everybody says.
And next time I'll just burn it down and move.
Okay. And what they always say is, okay, so you get the bid. And so you've negotiated, you get the offer, now add 20% on top of that. And I think in life, it's not a bad way to approach life.
I think so too. So you can avoid playing poker with the old sea dogs, but you can't keep the Treasury Secretary from playing poker with you.
Yep.
Well, your most recent book, The New Frugality: How to Consume Less, Save More, and Live Better. By the way, you left off lose weight, look younger, and be a better person there. It really is a good read, and it contains a bunch of common sense advice from from a well-educated economist like yourself. What do you mean by the new frugality?
What I mean by the new frugality is there's been this movement that's been on the sort of tributaries of our society called sustainability. And it's one of those big, ugly words. But what it means is people are concerned about their carbon footprint. They're concerned about their local entrepreneurs, the vibrancy of their community, the vibrancy of their neighborhood, leaving the world a better place for their children. And sustainability has been on the fringes of our society. But one of the things that recessions do, particularly great recessions, is they tend to accelerate underlying changes in an economy. For example, with the Great Depression, you can go over a longer period of time, but really for about 30 years, there have been a lot of agitation for some sort of social insurance program to protect the elderly. And there's been a lot of agitation, a lot of talk. Some stuff had happened on the state level, but it took the Great Depression to sort of make that happen. So I think what happened with the Great Recession is that it made people realize that being green and being frugal reinforce one another, because people were being forced to be frugal. But the thing about being green and being frugal is it has nothing to do with being cheap. This is really that's why I call it the new frugality. If you go back, and there's this wonderful archive, Time Magazine, in a moment of corporate largesse that I don't think would be repeated, they put all the time on its archive online. And you can search it. It's a really good search engine. And you can go back and look at the discussions during all previous recessions post-World War II period. And people would always say, we're going to be more frugal. We're going to be more thrifty. But what they really meant is we're going to be really cheap. And nobody wants to be cheap. That's why we'd lose it. When the good times would come along, you start borrowing more, saving less. But with sustainability, with frugality, it makes you more conscious about what you're spending your money on. Is this what you want to be doing? Is this an activity you want to be supporting? Is this an entrepreneur in your local neighborhood that you would like to thrive and you want to spend your dollars there? And maybe you move away from a world of disposable pens, but you move toward a world where you buy a pen that you really like, and then you maybe you're even going to pass it on to your children. So it makes you it's got nothing to do with being cheap. It's more about experiences, your impact on the world, how you want to leave the world a better place. It gives you a frame. And that's why I call it the new frugality as opposed to the old frugality.
So we'll be a little bit more like Grandma and Grandpa who remember the Great Depression and would save aluminum foil and that sort of thing.
Well, so I'm talking to my mother. Mom's 85 years old. And I was out there, lives outside of Washington, D.C., and she made this pronouncement, which she tends to do, makes pronouncements. She says, I was green before people knew anything about being green. So, and I still remember in the 1960s, my dad's last job at night was to unplug all the appliances in the house. And the reason why he did that is you would save electricity. Now, many people actually still do that, but the reason why they do it today is that it saves money, but it's also green. And that's the difference. In the 1960s, people did a lot of these things because they didn't have much money. Today, people actually have, despite the period of time that we're living, we are an incredibly wealthy society. But people are choosing to do these things because, yes, it saves them money, but it also is better for the environment.
Well, that's so there is a difference between frugal and plain cheap. It's virtuous to be frugal.
It is virtuous, and in fact, the origins of the word, it has to do with bearing fruit, with virtue, as opposed to being cheap.
Well, one of the things that you'll find is that there's a very different attitude toward housing, for example, among the baby boomers than there was with their parents. And, our homes have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. We've looked at it at first as a savings vehicle, and then as a piggy bank, and now as a millstone. But in your book, you talk a little bit about how your grandfather wasn't buying into the whole idea of a house as an investment vehicle. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
So after World War II, my parents were living in, like many people, was a broken up mansion, a little apartment, and my dad was a little over 6 feet tall, and he would have to kneel to shave, one of those things. And I don't even know if it didn't have a kitchen or anything like that, probably a little hot plate, that type of thing. And no privacy, nothing. And so they moved to Levittown in 1949. Levittown opened in 1948. And Levittown on Long Island was really the first suburb. And it's a suburb that captured the imagination of a lot of people, often negative, like in Catcher in the Rye, for people who read that. But for the World War II generation, it was a real step up in life. It had radiant heat. It had 2 bedrooms. I mean, it was nice. It had a kitchen, refrigerator. So it was a real step up in life. I was interviewing my mom about it because I knew we'd moved and I wanted to tell a little bit of the story. And then she sort of just said as an aside, and of course, you know, your father's father, your grandfather, wouldn't talk to him for years. He was so upset that we had done this. And he was convinced that my father had ruined the family. All right. And I go, what are you talking about? Well, to make a long story very short, my grandfather had a good job in the 1920s. And so he moved an extended Irish Catholic family into a home that he bought in Yonkers, New York, but it was an interest-only mortgage. And with an interest-only mortgage, you never really build up equity. And a home value has to maintain its value for it to work. Well, of course, you go into the Great Depression, home values go down, he loses the home. By the way, interest-only mortgages came back in the 2000s, which is proof positive for anyone listening to this. It takes 80 years for a really bad idea to come back.
Okay. People forget that anything that can't go on forever won't.
Yeah. So, yeah. And so an extended Irish Catholic family moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Yonkers and never bought again. So to him, you know, this was a really risky thing to do. To my parents, they were optimistic. They believed in life. And if you think about borrowing is actually an incredibly optimistic act. I think this is an underappreciated aspect of borrowing, that if you take out a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, you basically believe that over the next 30 years you're going to be employed. You're going to be able to meet that mortgage. I mean, I know you sort of may be thinking, well, we'll sell it in 5 or 7 years. But, you know, it's a fundamentally an optimistic act. And that's why in previous eras, calls for frugality, calls for not to spend too much, one of the reasons why I think they didn't resonate with people is people believe the world's going to be a better place. Well, the thing about sustainability is that's an incredibly optimistic act. Because who knows what's going to happen at the level of international treaties? I mean, who knows, okay? And the science and all that has evolved. But I've met so many people who basically believe that if they are conscious about their spending, if they're conscious about their savings, if they worry about their local community, that they're going to make the world a better place. And it's going to add up to make a difference. It's an extremely optimistic act.
You know, a generation ago, we weren't so worried about our communities being environmentally sustainable.
Yeah.
We were worried about them being bombed, atomic bombed, and so that made it much more immediate to live life right now.
Yeah.
But you talk about the optimism, and I think that's right. Americans are an incredibly optimistic people. We make all kinds of decisions with the idea that things are good now, but they'll be better later, and debt is one of those things.
Yes.
And right now, people are really crushed. Many people are crushed by the housing debt, by credit card debt, et cetera. You talk a little bit about debt, but in your book, but there's some good debt. Not all debt is bad.
Not all debt is bad. I mean, if you take a look, we've gone through an 80-year period, because the whole rise of consumer debt really started in the 1920s. I mean, I know it traced before then, but it was really in the 1920s that it really started out with the automobile. That's what really made consumer debt acceptable, because hardly anybody could afford a car. And so you start borrowing. And then you get the Great Depression, World War II. And then you come out of that. But then sort of consumer debt just continued to grow over a long period of time. And basically what happened is we pushed it way too far. We just pushed it way too. So people are moving back. And even if you don't buy the thesis of the new frugality, I do think fundamentally there's going to be a shift in the way households manage their money. That they recognize they borrowed too much and they need to save more. And there is such a thing as good debt. So good debt can be buying a home. Now, I know there's all kinds of issues with home ownership right now, but here's one way of looking at it. The fundamental deal with a home changed in the 2000s during the bubble, because for our parents, when they did buy a home that post-World War II era, home's always been a lousy investment. I mean, it really has been. If you look at the numbers, it's a lousy investment. I know you can always pull out of, somebody who'll tell you, I made all this money. Of course, I can also pull out somebody in the stock market and pull out a lot more people who lost money in the stock market. But it's also a lifestyle. And the thing was, it was an investment plus a lifestyle. But what it really was forced savings. So every month when you paid down that mortgage, you were building up equity. And as time goes on, you're actually building up equity fairly quickly, right? Well, what happened with, you'd mentioned treating our homes as a piggy bank. Well, what happened in the 2000s was it became really cheap to refinance. It became really easy to refinance. You could drag a home equity loan. You could drag out all our equity. So you could own a home for 10 years and have no equity. You would, in essence, be creating your own interest-only mortgage. And so what I'm hoping going forward is that people recognize that the real key about a home was that it was an automatic way of building up savings. We all know it's hard to save. The great thing about a 403B or a 401k, if you participate in a plan, it comes out of your paycheck every paycheck. You don't do anything. It just sort of happens. It's the same thing with a home. You didn't do anything. You just lived there and paid off the mortgage. So now we need to come up with different ways to save automatically. But a home can be a very good investment, and most importantly, your education is a good investment. That's not the same thing as saying borrow whatever it takes, because education always pays. We know that's not right. But when you're talking about good debt, there are two forms of good debt, I think, still. One is a home, and one is in education.
And credit cards are not part of that good debt.
Credit cards are not part of that good debt. Credit card is an amazing technology. All right? It is an incredible technology. And if you use a credit card and pay it off at the end of the month, it's fine. It's convenient. It's easy. It's a nice piece of technology. If you are carrying a balance, put the credit card away. Just put it away. And only use it when you're booking for a vacation or you're booking a rental car. There's certain protections that come along with a credit card that make it sensible to use at points like that. But other than that, no. A credit card should not be used to spend more than you should be spending. And it makes it really, and I don't understand the psychology. Maybe you do, because all the economists have studied, at least they've gotten fascinated with this whole behavioral finance. But why is it? It just isn't that hard to pull out a credit card. And we sort of, you just sort of hand it over. But man, it really hurts to pull out those dollar bills. Mm-hmm. Or I guess really it's 20s these days, because you go to the ATM, you're always getting 20s. And it's really hard. And so just, take advantage of that in your personal finances. Put the credit card away and use those bills or use that debit card.
Well, I think part of it is just that it used to be if you pulled out the credit card, people would look at you a little bit funny. Now there have been ads on television that if you pull out cash or you pull out a check, you're actually going to pay in cash.
Yes.
You're actually going to pay for what you're going to buy. And the idea is that people are looking at you funny there. So the social stigma associated with carrying debt seems to be much, much less than it was before. The social stigma of declaring bankruptcy and being in foreclosure has also declined dramatically. I think Americans are trying to get out of debt right now, and it's going to be a very long.
It's going to be very long, but they really are moving in that direction. And one of the forecasts that I really disagree with is that, well, when the times are good, we're going to go back. This was too searing an experience. I mean, and perhaps the right analogy is the 1970s. Joseph Nocera, he's a wonderful columnist for the New York Times. And he's written a number of wonderful, really good books. But anyway, in an interview, he was saying, in the 1970s, his parents used to just scream at him till they were blue in the face, because he and all his friends were borrowing as much money as possible, and to buy homes and all kinds of things. And their parents said, "It's terrible." And he said, we'd look at them and say, "What are you talking about? We're being smart. We're paying back the lender with depreciating dollars. I mean, this is the smart thing to do." And that experience really survived a long time. That sort of rules of thumb that evolved during that inflationary period survived even as inflation was coming down. And that was the whole thing, borrow as much as you can, buy as big a home as you can, all that kind of stuff. And so I think this is the same kind of experience. What are people talking about? Don't get into credit card debt.
Well, that's great advice. The best day to plant a tree is 20 years ago.
That's right.
The second best day is today.
Yeah.
I think there are quite a few people in their 40s and 50s that never quite got around to saving for retirement. Is it too late for them? Is there something that they can do?
Oh, there's lots of things that they can do. I mean, the one thing you don't want to do, or leap to what you don't want to do, is take huge risks to make up for all that lost time. So, you haven't saved very much, so you decide, I'm just going to put everything in the stock market. I'm going to roll that dice. Well, you may be 70 and still not have any.
Well, great. Well, Chris, thank you very much for being our first guest on the new set.
Thank you for having me.
Chris Farrell is the author of the new Frugality, How to Consume Less, Save More, and Live Better. The important part is living better. I hope you did enjoy our new look on Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm excited to be a part of it. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.